The world's most dangerous place. Amna al-Khord was once a typical Syrian teen. She loved shopping with friends, surfing the web, and decorating her spacious bedroom inside her middle-class home in Yarmouk, a suburb of Damascus, Syria's capital. She looked forward to going to college to study computer science. Though the Khorders are pious Muslims, and Amana covers her hair with a headscarf, she enjoyed a degree of freedom in Syria that is not always available to women in conservative Muslim countries. She was allowed to wear makeup and stay out until sunset. Neighbors left their doors open for visitors, and Syria was considered one of the safest countries in the Middle East. Then, in 2011, 13-year-old Amna found herself surrounded by violent and unpredictable forces. Syria became engulfed in civil war. Amna's tight-knit community became sharply divided by political loyalties, those who supported President Bashar al-Assad versus those who wanted to oust the longtime dictator. Amna's family thought they could weather the crisis by not taking sides and going about their lives as best they could. But in late 2012, rebels swept into their neighborhood, and government forces ratcheted up attacks against the rebels. Amna's nightmare had begun. Armed rebel groups trolled the streets, stealing food and harassing Amna and other girls. But Assad's forces were more brutal, using bombs, airstrikes, and even chemical weapons to try to crush the rebellion. Amna's neighborhood was reduced to rubble. Her cousin and some friends died in the attacks. Amna, her two younger brothers, and their parents fled for their lives. Airstrikes do not discriminate between civilians and militants, she tells JS. We never took sides in this war, but of course that isn't enough to shield you. The Khorders now live in Shatila, a crowded camp for refugees in neighboring Lebanon. They are crammed together in a small, windowless room lit by a single candle. Outside, the streets teem with violence between rival gangs and thugs. Rats rummage in the filthy alleys between crumbling buildings. Amna, now 17, tries to be thankful. I don't like to whine because my family members escaped this senseless war unharmed, she says. But I don't know how we are going to survive here. Millions displaced. Since the conflict in Syria began, more than 160,000 people have been killed, and 2.5 million have fled to neighboring countries. Another 6.5 million have been displaced inside Syria. Amna and her brothers are part of what is now referred to as Syria's lost generation. At least half the refugees in Lebanon, Turkey, Iraq, and other countries in the region are children. Many no longer attend school. The crisis has become a disgraceful humanitarian calamity with suffering and displacement unparalleled in recent history, says Antonio Guterres, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Huge tent cities have been set up in Turkey and Jordan to accommodate hundreds of thousands of people. Some camps are prone to flooding with sewage seeping from the ground. How it began. Syria's civil war began as part of the Arab Spring in 2011, with a series of protests against President Assad, whose family has maintained harsh control over the country for 44 years. Thousands of peaceful demonstrators took to the streets calling for Assad to resign. As Assad's security forces cracked down on demonstrators, armed rebels replaced peaceful protesters. Syria is a multi-ethnic society. Like the Khorders, the majority of Syrians are Sunni Muslim. But for decades, the government has been controlled by Alawites, who have roots in Shia Islam. As the violence escalated in the country, various armed Sunni and Shia groups from around the Middle East streamed into Syria. Many have terrorist ties. This spring, the Syrian civil war spread beyond its borders into neighboring countries. In Iraq, a radical Sunni Muslim group called ISIS seized vast amounts of territory in northwestern Iraq and northern Syria. The group's goal is to establish a state governed by strict Islamic law. ISIS uses ruthless terrorist tactics. They torture opponents and have massacred large groups of Shia Muslims. ISIS's roots can be traced back to al-Qaeda, the terrorist organization that carried out the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks against the United States that killed more than 3,000 people in New York, Pennsylvania, and Washington, D.C. World leaders, including U.S. President Barack Obama, feared that the conflict would engulf the entire Middle East. We are possibly on the cusp of a regional war, says UN officials Vititi Muntarohorn. A wider Mid-East war could have a direct effect on the U.S. if the Iraqi government collapses under ISIS. Iraq could become a terrorist training ground with the U.S. as a target. In addition, Americans' allies in the region, including Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Turkey, and Israel, could be drawn into or threatened by the chaos. There are also economic implications. Iraq is a major oil producer. A continuing conflict there could cause the prices of oil to spike, which could hurt the U.S. economy. The refugee crisis has also destabilized the region. In Lebanon, the government has refused to build new refugee camps, so the 1 million Syrian refugees there live wherever they can, in overcrowded apartments, stables, and makeshift camps. Making the best of it. For Amna, the future looks anything but stable. She has little hope of returning to Syria and expects the violence to last for years to come. Despite the odds, she's trying to remain optimistic about her life in Lebanon, a nation she never expected to call home. Though she hasn't attended school in 2 years, she's taking free classes in English, which she'll need to learn if she's able to find a spot in a high school in Lebanon. Her father, who still hopes she'll become a computer scientist, wants her to finish school. Though a sense of lawlessness exists around the camp, she says it's a far cry from the utter destruction in Syria. At least there are no bombs, no airstrikes, no tanks. If we stay close as a family, Amna says, we can make the best of our situation here.